Credit cards that offer rewards like travel discounts sound like a good idea, but a lot of people keep running balances on those rewards cards that end up costing them a lot more than any benefits they might see.
You may be tempted to say, okay, these are basically people who are making financial mistakes, and maybe you should have some sort of regulation that prevent this kind of people to have access to those cards.
IMF economist Andrea Presbitero says not so fast.
There could be very good reason for why some people want to have a reward card and pay for that. And one very simple reason is access to credit.
Andrea Presbitero also co-authored a research paper that looks at the distributional aspects of rewards cards. Check it out at imf.org. So before we get into this, I have to say that I am actually guilty of having a rewards card that I don't necessarily always pay off. Is it any worse, running a balance on a rewards card than it is on a non-rewards card?
No, I guess, first of all, you're not alone in being one of the people who run balances on reward cards. It's actually pretty common and happens very often. And yes, it's definitely not the best thing to do. It's what we call in our analysis sort of financial mistakes, because then cost you quite some money. And for some people, the amount are pretty large.
Okay. So the financial markets essentially make it their business to take advantage of people or consumers that want more than they need or can afford. What's different about this? I mean, why did you and your co-authors think that this was important research to dig into?
Yes, I think you framed in a good way. So one of the reasons why we think it's important is that we think that what happens in credit card markets and in the reward market is one of other potential channels through which financial market can actually increase or amplify existing inequalities. So we think it's important because, first of all, like reward credit card market is very large. So credit cards are ubiquitous. You find everywhere. You said that you have one. I also have maybe more than one. And in our analysis, we look at more than 200 million credit cards. And in our sample, half of them are reward card. And the sort of the share of reward card in total card issued in the US is going up. And clearly that's something which is very pervasive in the US market or in the Anglo-Saxon market, but it's becoming more and more common in Europe. Like I'm Italian, and there are rewards cards in Italy as well, and Latin America as well.
So it's a global phenomenon.
Yeah, it's currently biased towards the US and the UK, but it's becoming more global.
So, in your research, you explain how some people actually benefit or earn money from these reward cards, while others actually lose money from using these reward cards by the way that they use them. How does that translate into redistribution? Because you talk a lot about redistribution in the paper. Isn't this just simply, the banks that are benefiting?
Yes, let me unpack the question. I think there are three good questions in what you just said. I hope I will remember the three of them by the time I arrive to the end. So, why some people lose and why some people benefit for using cards? I guess that's what we find, but that's something not necessarily obvious. I guess if you were to ask my parents about that, they will tell you, you get a reward card, you get more rewards, you're going to be better off. Why not?
Yeah.
And so I guess many people approach the problem in that way. Say, yes, the banks is offering me a reward card, but by the way, they generally advertise sort of very, very strongly. Generally, they have this teaser APR, like 0% interest rate for, the first 6 months or so. And even in Equilibrium, like the APR, so the interest rate on the cards is lower than what you find in other classic cards. So there's a lot of incentive pushed by banks for people sort of to take up these credit cards. And then I guess we can think, yes, those people would benefit from that. In practice, that doesn't really happen. And so there are losers and winners. And why this happens is because by construction, you earn money when you use your credit card and you go out and shop and, buy groceries, you go for restaurants, you travel, you get points, miles, cash back.
So earning money is, in a sense, benefiting from the rewards that are given, like free travel or whatever.
Yeah, everybody get rewards. No, in the sense when you use the card and you spend. So the rewards are proportional to your spending. Every card is different. You have different kind of benefits. But put it simply, like the more you spend, the more sort of rewards, cash back you get. Then you can find that there are two different, to simplify, there are two different kinds of people. Like there are what we call like sophisticated people, and those people generally are they are very financial savvy. They pay attention to what they do when they use their credit cards. And so they use the credit card, they spend, they cash in the rewards, but then at the end of the month, they pay your full balance because they carry zero balance. And so what happens is that they pay only the annual fees, which, for some cards, the normal reward cards are sufficiently low, and then create this big status that give you like access to beautiful lounges are very expensive, but, that's the only thing you're going to pay. Then there are other people which are quite a large share of the population, which instead are less financially savvy. We call them naive. And those people generally make financial mistakes. And one of these financial mistakes is exactly the fact that they basically carry over outstanding balance at the end of the month. And on those balances, you pay interest rate, and these interest rates are pretty large. And so maybe you spend like $1,000 in a month, you get like $50 in benefit points or cashback, but then you carry over a balance of $800 because maybe you were only be able to pay back $200, and therefore the interest payment are going to be even larger than the reward you're going to get. And so on a net basis, what we find that most cardholders on net basis basically gain negative rewards.
So they're paying for their travel at the end of the day anyway,
yes,
more than it would normally cost probably.
Yes. And then leads me to the third part of your question, which is, okay, we frame it as a distribution, saying that there are some people who gain and some who lose, mean like the naive guy who to some extent like subsidize the sophisticated guys. But if you look at the problem from a different perspective, you look at the problem from the bank perspective, what you can see is that at the end of the day, the key player who always wins is the bank. So the banks, makes money, and actually we show that in our analysis, makes money through the entire distribution of cardholders. So for people who carry outstanding balances, they make money mostly because of interest payments. And then if people are very late, they make money for late fees, which are generally very expensive. For the other people which are very savvy, clearly you don't get any interest, but those people generally tend to spend a lot of money. And then the banks makes money because of these interchange fees. So the idea that every time you go and pay, you swipe your credit card, and part of the $100 you pay, a fraction, generally 2%, 3%, goes to the banks.
And so how much of this redistribution are we talking about, and where does it go actually? So
that's one of the reasons why we think it's important to look at this problem, because it could be interesting to see how people behave and which are sort of potential financial mistakes. But we also think it's relevant from a more sort of macro perspective. Okay. So first of all, like one data we can say is that generally bank pays something about $35 billion in rewards, and that's the data we have from 2019. That's more or less the size of the entertainment industry in the US. So you're talking about a lot of money. That's in aggregate. If you look at the individual level, the consumer level, our analysis, keep in mind that we look at what happened in a given month, and what we find is generally people who use reward card as something like $3 or $4 more in terms of rewards. But then this variation is
so the $3 to $5 more, I don't really understand what you're saying there.
Let me try to explain it a bit better. So what we do in our analysis, we compare individuals, cardholders, which are as similar as possible, but let's say you have a classic card, I have a reward card.
Okay.
Then we compute the net rewards, which is the difference between the gross reward, so actually the reward you cash in when you use the card, and the cost of using the card, so fees and interest payment. So if you look at these net rewards, on average, they are positive. So if you have a reward card, you are somewhat better off than if you have a classic card, because by construction, the classic card can only cost you some money.
Got it.
And this difference is something like $3 to $4. What is interesting is not this difference between the classic card and the reward card, but is how this difference changes across individuals. And so as I said before, like our distinction between naive people and sophisticated people. So in practice, how we say that you are naive or sophisticated, we use your credit score, your FICO score. So the FICO score is a good proxy, among other things, also of your degree of financial sophistication, because we can see in the paper that is sort of strongly associated and correlated with the chances that people make financial mistakes, in the sense that low FICO score people tend to make more financial mistakes than the others.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here because I see something interesting in your paper where you say that there's this, what you're calling this reverse Robin Hood aspect to this phenomenon. And when you start looking at those FICO scores, as you were just explaining, it sort of takes a different twist. So walk us through how these credit rating scores put a twist in this story.
Yes, that's exactly a good point to sort of try to explain why we have a story different what the way generally people frame the reward programs. So the way this is generally portrayed is this reverse Robin Hood hypothesis, and the intuition very simple is that the amount of money that I mentioned before, this average $4 per month that people with reward card get compared to people who have classic cards, is generally paid off by the low-income people, who basically subsidize the rich people. So this is why it is reverse Robin Hood.
Because
story.
they're paying penalties and interest. And
yes. So basically people are, at least some people, some commentators are adverse to the reward program because, hey, it creates a lot of adversary distribution. It's just basically amplifying inequalities because it's basically the poor who finance the rich. So what we do, we're not saying that it's not true. So we're saying that this is only part of the story and there is a little bit more than that, and the story is a little bit more nuanced. And so I left you before saying that there is this $3 to $5 difference per month. And if you believe the reverse Robin Hood hypothesis, you would say that if there is variation in this net rewards across people, it means that the rich people gain a lot and the poor people pays a lot. So what we do, we don't look at the variation across individual income, but we look at the variation of these rewards across the FICO score, so across the degree of sophistication. And if we plot the net reward across FICO scores for all possible credit cards and card holders, what we find is that those who pay more tend to be like people with very low FICO score or relatively low FICO score, the subprime and near prime guys, while the prime and even more so the super prime guys are the ones that actually benefit from that. So from that, we say that it's a story about sophistication. And we put the two things together and we say, okay, maybe, and generally what people tend to tell us is that, okay, but then when you look at FICO score, it's another way of looking at income. You know, if you're rich, you have a FICO score. If you're poor, you have a low FICO score. Surprisingly enough, if you look at the data carefully, the correlation between the two is not that high. And that's not only our answer. You know, in practice, what we do is that we do this sort of variation. We look at the distribution of these net rewards across FICO score within different income buckets. So we look only at card holders that are low income, only the middle income, and only in the high income. And we find exactly the same story within the different income buckets. So even regardless of the income, even if you zoom in within the low income, you still find this redistribution, which is driven by sophistication. If I look within the very high income guys, I still find that there are sort of like unsophisticated high-income people that basically subsidize rich and sophisticated guys.
So having looked at the FICO scores and the various groups, you establish that there's a demographic aspect to this as well. And you touched upon it a little earlier about inequalities, how it might actually increase inequalities. How might it increase inequalities within our communities?
Yes, we also look at sort of inequality and redistribution from an aggregate perspective. So going back to what I said before, like one aspect of our analysis is looking, at the individual behavior, and we are interested in sort of financial mistakes, and we show that sophistication is particularly relevant to understand how there is redistribution across individuals. But then we also observe that the size of this program are incredibly large. So it's interesting from a macro perspective to see does this can sort of help explain why there are widening inequalities within the U.S. regions, countries, and zip codes. So what we do, we aggregate our data. So we have data which are individual at the card level, card by card data. Then we aggregate all this data at the zip code level. And then we look at sort of the average, we compute the average net reward for each zip code, and then we try to see which zip code gains and which zip code lose in terms of net rewards. And if you do a map of that, the map you come up and you visualize it's in the paper, it's basically the standard map you see in the US. The US are, very peculiar in having like a lot of sort of segregation in terms of income, race, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. And sort of if you plot the distribution of rewards, it mimics very well standard distribution of other macro variable and demographic variable in the US. So if you do something a little bit more sophisticated from a statistical point of view, what we find is that areas which tend to have higher net rewards tend to be like higher income areas, low minority areas, more educated areas, and by contrast, clearly areas in which there is like negative net reward, so an outflow of money from those zip codes, tend to be areas which start already from a very disadvantaged position because they have a high share of minorities, they have lower income people, they have less educated people. So to that extent, at the macro level, we show that there is distribution going from less privileged to more privileged area of the country.
How interesting. So is there anything we can do about this problem?
Here we are generally, a little bit cautious in going into policy implication and so. And one reason is simply that it's very difficult then to come up with welfare analysis. We would need a model, something that we don't have in our analysis. And there are a number of caveats that one should keep in mind. First of all, let me mention one. No, mm-hmm. I told you a couple of times probably that there are some people at the low end of the FICO distribution, like these naive people that spend money, pay to use a reward card, and you may be tempted to say, okay, these are basically people who are making financial mistakes and it shouldn't be like that, and they maybe should have some sort of regulation that prevent this kind of people to have access to those cards. And if you think a little bit more carefully, that's not the right answer. There could be very good reason for why some people want to have a reward card and pay for that. And one very simple reason is access to credit. Like a reward card, it generally have much higher credit limit. And so, in credit card debt is the easiest you can get, and it's still way cheaper than possible worse alternative, which are payday loans and so on and so forth. Yeah. So it could be that for individual perspective, it could be like some people could be better off having a reward card because they need to borrow, maybe they have a medical emergency or something like that. And yes, they are paying. So, but that's exactly, that's the cost for access to credit. That's the big caveat that I have in mind. That said, we clearly see this program, which are incredibly large and they have a lot of redistribution. They take advantage of naivete in people and the fact they make financial mistakes. So there are at least two things which are important. One, which I think is uncontroversial, is financial literacy. So investing in more financial literacy and financial education. There's a lot of effort. There are colleagues, universities nearby here in the area that do a lot of work on that, and I think it's extremely important. And the other one is some sort of regulation to bring in more competition in the market. And this is actually something in which there is ongoing discussion for more than a year in the US, at least in Congress, with bipartisan proposal to try to bring a little bit more competition in the market. And, again, if you do a comparison between the US and Europe, in Europe, there are some of these reward programs, but are way smaller. And the reason why we're smaller, for instance, is because there are caps on interchange fees. So, and so banks cannot gain too much of that. So because of that, the rewards program are smaller, and therefore you have lesser distribution. So that's one way in which at least one could think about like trying to sort of change the market and reduce the size. But clearly there are a lot of other people that advocates for the opposite and enjoy the rewards, enjoy the miles, enjoy the cashbacks.
It might be something that's difficult to get through Congress in the United States. Fascinating research. Andrea Presbitero, an economist in the IMF's research department. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Andrea Presbitero is the co-author, along with Sumit Agarwal, Andre Silva, and Carlo Wicks, of a research paper on the redistribution of the credit card market. Check it out at imf.org. You can hear more IMF podcasts on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at IMF_podcast. I'm Bruce Edwards. Thanks for listening.